Oh yeah. And my classroom was on the first floor. So we, it was, you could see the mold up on the walls. There were dead rats and other kind of, cats. I mean, there's just, everything was moldy and decaying. And in my room, I had, this American flag that I still have that's got mold, I had it in this thing, but you could see it covered. And it just, because I taught civics and all this like emotion just came out of me of like how frustrated I'd been at the loss of like that experience, the loss of those students, because most didn't have cell phones at this time, right? We were still on those flip phones. And so I had no way of knowing where kids had gone or what they had done.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio, and we welcome our guest, Mr. Chris Meyer. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so you're CEO of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, a big job. So tell us what BRAF does for Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas.
Oh, wow. How much time do you have? I think at our core, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation really does three things. One, we inspire philanthropists. Two, we support the doers in our community. And three, we really bring impact together. And we've been doing that for nearly 60 years. And so I've been blessed to be here for the last 18 months leading the foundation.
Yeah. And so what does that third item mean, bringing impact together? Yeah,
I think when you look around at our community, it's some of the most transformational projects that really require collaboration across government, nonprofit, business sector. When you look at sort of a big sort of inspiring kind of vision and how we're going to lead to completion of that vision. You can look at downtown revitalization. You can look at the Pennington Biomedical Center. You can look at the now sort of restoration of the LSU Lakes, which is beginning any day now, right?
Right.
These sort of projects that really move our community forward along a number of dimensions. BRAF has typically been the entity that's been behind the scenes, been a real backbone to kind of bring people together and help make those visions a reality. And so I think we do our best work sort of quietly behind the scenes with partners, never caring about credit, but certainly caring about delivering on a better community.
Yeah. The water campus?
The water campus is another great example, right? So here, having a sort of internationally recognized research institution that really applies the science of how we address rising, tides, rising seas, how we deal with, floods that certainly we experienced here in 2016, Houston as well. That campus really bringing together both the scientists and those engineers and others who are going to implement those plans. That was a vision that was born out of conversations that happened at the foundation, and again took a sort of big tent, a big coalition to make happen.
Yeah. So John Davies was the CEO for 30 plus years.
30 plus years. That's right.
And so how do you step in and make a change from that?
Yeah, so I think of this as sort of chapters, right? John created an incredible legacy under his leadership. The foundation really grew from, I think, a vision of a small group of community leaders, relatively modest assets at the time, about $5 million, and he was able to grow that over the years to over $700 million. Wow. And again, when you look at the impact, that's over $700 million of grants that have been given in our community over 30 plus years. You think about the 3 dozen nonprofits that have been created over time, like Companion Animal Alliance, New Schools for Baton Rouge, which I was a part of, the Water Institute of the Gulf. Go on, and you see kind of the legacy of that. You see the physical transformation. So when I think about kind of that legacy, what I really see my job as is, how do I take us to the next level?
Right.
And for that, really the theme is, how do we make this community foundation really belong to everyone in our community? Because ultimately, it is a reflection of us. And so I've really kind of been, over this first year, doing a lot of listening, learning, and planning for how we take our impact to even higher levels, because that's what John would want. And certainly, whenever my time ends, I want the next leader to take it even further than I can.
Right.
And so that's we are stewards on behalf of our community of these sort of collective assets and this collective vision of how do we make Baton Rouge the best version of itself.
So at the root of it is donors,
right?
That's
right.
Which are providing funds to the foundation, which the foundation can then deploy into these different nonprofit initiatives, or are there for-profit initiatives as well?
Well, it's interesting how the foundation works. So we have multiple ways that individuals can sort of be more strategic in their giving. I think we are a generous community. We have, certainly, someone was telling me the other day, in Louisiana, we've got about 7,500 registered churches. And a lot of times giving is done through our tithes. It's done in kind of small ways that, we hear something at school, we hear something in our neighborhood. And so we are a giving people. Philanthropy is about giving with a sort of strategic aim. It's giving because you want to change something. You want to see something better in the community. And so what BRAF allows is a vehicle for donors at any level to create that change. So one way, and a way that over 1,000 people in our community do, is they create their own funds. These are called donor advised funds, and folks, really, it's almost like a checking account, an investment account. And so you put money in, you get tax deductions for that. You decide where and when you want to give that money out. Now, BRAF, we help inform our donors about the opportunities, and we create new tools like our Giving Store, which was just launched. This allows donors sort of a one-stop shop to give to any nonprofit. So you can decide, I want to search for all the organizations focused on kind of youth sports, what's going on in our community. Right. You can look there, see that, and then, with one click of a button, give grants to 3 or 4 nonprofits at once. So, we're trying to expose that to not just then our donors, but anyone in the community can use the Giving Store. And so, again, our job is to, how do we make a philanthropy available to anyone? Because anyone, whether you have $10 or $10 million, you can be a philanthropist in our community.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So you grew up in Shreveport?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. East Texas.
Okay. And so your father was a long-haul truck driver. Mm-hmm. Your mother, when you were born, was a nurse's assistant, mm-hmm. right?
That's right.
And I read where you said you kind of grew up on the wrong side of the tracks there. Tell us what your early childhood was like.
I mean, it was as normal as I would have known as a kid, because I didn't know any different. Right. But, we had a big family. Faith was huge in our lives. I remember on, Sundays, we would have this sort of big family dinner. So I had lots of great aunts, lots of cousins. We'd all gather at my grandmother's house, and it was sort of this potluck kind of lunch. And you just remember back to those days of being in plastic swimming pools in the driveway, and really, the sort of idea that the family took care of each other. So, we at times, we had to move in with my grandmother at one point because we had lost her house, right? And so the ability to kind of lean on each other, to sort of find strength, to find hope and purpose in the world. And so we were a giving family. Again, we took care of each other, we took care of our neighbors. And I think those kind of values early on in life really kind of inspired me that we are here for some bigger purpose, and ultimately it's about what you leave, not sort of what you do and what you get.
Yeah. And so you met an individual, a football coach, right?
Yeah.
English teacher, John Williams.
Yeah.
Tell us the impact that he had on you.
Yeah. So Mr. Williams, I mean, straight out of Central Casting. I mean, he had these like thick sideburns. I mean, he looked like he was in the 70s, but he was my English teacher and my football coach at Ridgewood Middle School. And, he was one that, I don't know what it is about sort of coaches that also are teachers, but they just kind of can motivate you in different ways. And, he would always sort of give me tough feedback, but kept telling me he believed in me and I could do better, and would give me sort of praise for things that you don't think you're doing well at. So I knew what I was good at on the athletic field, but to hear, I really loved your paper, or, great job on this essay, I think that sort of motivated me that, okay, I've got something here. And he was really the one that when I was thinking about decisions of going to high school, I had a neighborhood high school Woodlawn that I was going to be zoned to. This was not the Woodlawn of the Terry Bradshaw days. This was a very different kind of Woodlawn. And its graduation rate was in the teens. Oh my one of the lowest performing schools in the state. And but they had sports, and that's where my friends were going to school. And so there was really this idea of, do you go there or do I apply to this magnet school that I know nothing about? I don't know anyone going there, and it's all the way on the other side of town. And he really pushed me, and I went to my parents and said, what should I do? And they said, we don't know. I mean, what does he think? So, these outsized influences that at the right time really push you. And that decision, in fact, he drove me to the testing day.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was on a Saturday. You had to go and take kind of an entry test, placement test, and he drove me there. And it was all of that, right? Like, It's like these little things that, he doesn't know how big of a difference that made.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Yeah. So that was Caddo
Magnet High School. Magnet. Yeah. So, fantastic school, and, instantly arrive on campus, and I'm the first bus pickup in the morning because I live on the far south of Shreveport.
And what time is that pickup?
It's 5:45. So I remember, it's like the days you get on the bus when it's cold outside and the windows are fogged because it's so hot inside the bus. And I remember, I'd fall asleep, but you get to school and, kids are driving BMWs and, they're the children of doctors and lawyers, and everyone's talking about college. That's kind of the sort of cool factor, if you will, right? Yeah. Kids are wearing college T-shirts, and that as a young kid that doesn't know any of those examples in his life. Like, I know college because of what I may see on TV. Right. This really starts to have an influence on me and my thinking about, okay, well, what is that all about? And, that led over time to making friends that I went on trips with them. I remember a friend that took me down to Rice in Houston, right? That was a big trip for me just to see a college campus with his family. And so all those things exposed and kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And it was then pretty sure to myself, like, I'm going to college.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you had mentioned that you had moved in with your grandparents.
Yeah.
I think I'd read that your father had lost his job.
Yeah.
He got hurt.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And then they fired him or something like that.
Couldn't work. I mean, right? the reality is if you can't climb up the truck and you can't drive, what are you going to do? And so, he bounced around to a number of jobs over years in truck driving. He never owned his own truck, so. Right. He wasn't sort of one of these independent operators. He really had to, be able to be hired by a company that would give them their truck. So, but I think those experiences, you realize how so easily one slip, kind of one fall, and then your entire kind of existence and well-being can be rocked. And again, we didn't feel. I didn't really notice a difference about kind of our family and ourselves really until I got to high school. That's when I could sort of see.
You could see the difference of how you were growing up and maybe how some of the
Yeah,
kids.
well, you realize what others had and what they had access to and what they were doing. And then, you know, I remember a friend who lived in this really kind of first-class country club, and he invited several of us over to spend the night, and we hit a pool. I mean, this was like, you know, I thought this was a mansion, right? It's just the biggest thing I'd ever seen. And again, those sort of experiences and the social capital that comes along with that, you don't realize how that's not necessarily translated to so many other kids. You don't get that from television or social media. I mean, it's in those interactions one-on-one and building relationships that you start to figure out kind of how the world works, what others are like, and you know, how you can be part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how did you do at Caddo Magnet?
That was great. I finished second in my class, and you know, I was constantly pushed by teachers to take harder courses, right? You know, they were the influences that said, no, take this AP, load up, struggle here because we can support you, and this prepares you for something better. So this idea of kind of pushing myself and trying and realizing that I was just as talented, I was just as smart, and I knew that I would work hard because I'd been given an opportunity that, you know, the friends I would go home to in the evenings, right, and we'd play ball in the neighborhood or whatever, like go to church together. Again, same friends, same types of people. We were on two totally different tracks now because I was being exposed to dozens of AP courses. They didn't even have advanced placement in their schools, right? Yeah. So you could just tell all of a sudden our trajectories were going to be different. And the only reason it was because I'd gone to a school that invested and sort of had a culture around excellence and high achievement. And so that really motivated me for what comes next. Yeah.
So you go to Tulane.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with that a little bit. How did you get to Tulane?
Yeah. So, you know, I was at the time, I applied to a lot of colleges and really didn't know, you know, what the right fit would be. And so I got in, was accepted at a lot of places. There were two motivating factors. I mean, one was money, just being real. Right. And I ended up getting a full scholarship to Tulane.
No kidding.
And that was a pretty easy decision because, I mean, again, we looked around and my parents were not going to be able to help me.
And that's where I was making the connection. I was like, how? And I, you know, my notes here, I have scholarship, full ride. Yeah. So you were able to pull that off?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And again, New Orleans felt, you know, I knew I wanted to try something different. I wanted to kind of get out of the North Louisiana bubble. Right. And New Orleans was far enough that, you know, my parents and the people at church prayed for me every, you know, he's gone off to Sin City. But it was close enough that if something happened, right, I could get back without, you know, a plane ticket or all that. So that was really it. And I felt Tulane was the right size, you know, again, for a kid who, you know, had lived kind of in a bubble, haven't really traveled much, and it was such a kind of international university. I mean, you know, you had about 25% of the folks who attended there from the Northeast. So it really was a university that felt bigger than just Louisiana, which I loved because that opened my eyes to, you know, a much bigger world.
And so your degree at Tulane was in what?
Yeah, in economics and political science. Okay. So I was enamored with public policy, with how to make government work better. Again, we had experienced a lot of the frustrations throughout like high school of unemployment insurance and how to qualify and you know, different sort of rules around which doctors my dad could see and stuff like that. I mean, you know, all those things that you just watch and you're like, why does it work this way? And why is it so hard? And even then I was having questions of like, why did I get to go to this great high school and the others we just allowed to sort of languish and you know, have no accountability for their outcomes? I mean, those were questions that I was wrestling with, and that's what I wanted to learn how to fix.
And so you graduated in 2004 from Tulane with a degree in political science?
And economics,
And economics. And then what did you do after that? Teach for America?
That's right.
Yeah. How did you get involved in that?
Yeah. So 2002, I was on the university government at Tulane, and we did a lot of volunteer work in local New Orleans high schools and other public schools in New Orleans. But I was, it's my senior year, I actually did a project, a senior thesis on vouchers. This was with the Archdiocese, and they were thinking about at the time, could we expand a sort of tuition voucher program that would allow low-income families to choose and access private schools, but would be funded, publicly. And we were looking at, what would be the sort of, needs in terms of space and facilities within the Archdiocese. How would the framework work? What were the sort of legal ramifications at the time? There were other scholarship laws and voucher laws in Wisconsin and others that were being challenged in courts. And so this was this whole idea of like, how do we help fix the New Orleans public schools, and how do we give kids a way out?
And this is prior to Katrina.
Correct. Yeah. So, a lot of this, I was touring, a lot of these private schools. I was touring and I'd been involved in New Orleans public schools from a volunteer perspective. And again, you could see the inequities and the difference in investment in those two systems. And it's not like the tuition rates at New Orleans public schools were all kind of out the, roof. As, some obviously Dominican, but your average tuition was around $5,000. And the average kid going to New Orleans public school, we as taxpayers were paying over $11,000.
Oh my goodness.
So what was happening with all the money, and why were you seeing, again, such physically in disrepair facilities, poor outcomes, and students kind of trapped in that environment? And so that motivated me. And so I heard about this thing called Teach for America. I talked to the recruiter. I said, look, I would love to do this because I want to give back and I can see myself, but here's what I'd love to do. I want to stay in New Orleans. I want to teach high school. And if I can do that, if I can be, and I wanted to teach social studies. So if I can teach something in history and be in a New Orleans high school, then I'll join. And this is a lesson, and it doesn't hurt to ask, right? What's the worst they're going to tell you? And they said, you got it. Wow. And so I was assigned to John McDonough High School in New Orleans. This was the lowest performing high school in Louisiana in 2002 and 2003. And here I was, brand new first year teacher in 2004.
But did you have a teaching certificate? I mean, how'd you do that?
Yeah, so Teach for America, basically your bachelor's degree gets you sort of credentialed. You have to pass 2 exams or 3 exams to get sort of credentialed, and there's kind of a track where your first year you're a kind of practitioner teacher. So I think I got my license at the end of the first year. Teach for America also puts you through this sort of boot camp that, look, nothing can fully prepare you for, I think, teaching in these really challenged inner city high schools or schools in general. I think the bet was, from a content perspective, that wasn't the issue. Even the sort of strategies on kind of how to manage a classroom, there's strategy you can teach there. It ultimately came down to a sort of commitment of will and leadership. Can you connect with youth? Can you care enough about them the way like Mr. Williams did for me that you're going to succeed, and I'm going to do whatever it takes on my end to get you there? And, the sad reality was so many of my colleagues that I met didn't have the same motivation. And that's not because they were bad people. And there was a teacher next to me that we would talk all the time, and he literally would show up 5 minutes late, kind of put his feet on the desk, tell the kids, do chapter 32 and whatever that means. And I kind of asked him, I was like, why are you so disengaged? And he would always tell me, he's like, it doesn't, like, I get paid no differently if I spend an extra ounce of energy here. And if you understand the system the way I have, we go through, I had 4 principals my first year. There's constant turnover in leadership. You can be reassigned, you don't get to pick the school you teach in. They assign you. And so you work in this environment where you're a cog, literally this little widget that they just move around. And it's sort of dehumanizing that, he's paid more than me just because he's breathed longer, and has another degree. It doesn't matter how his kids do or the outcomes. And that's, that's the whole nature of kind of, I think, public systems, especially in education, is the incentives were all wrong. And so that experience, I mean, it was as much about me learning as my students learning. But I struggled with, with the motivation that a lot of others had of really kind of, why do you stay in it if you've been this beat down and this misused?
We would like to thank Castro Real Estate Services for sponsoring the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Castro Real Estate Services is a full-service real estate brokerage firm based in Baton Rouge. They can handle commercial and residential transactions in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. Need to buy or sell real estate? Call the company that cares about you. Castro Real Estate. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. Okay, so when you started your job as a teacher, you didn't assume you were going to continue to be a teacher for your career.
That's right. That's right.
You knew that you were just going to do this for a certain period of time. But then Katrina hit.
Yeah.
Right? So what happened? What was your experience with that?
Yeah, so, like you said, I mean, my goals were, I want to contribute while I'm here. I want to make a difference in the lives of kids. I want to, impact my school community, the neighborhoods around me, and I want to learn because I want to more deeply understand what's really happening on the ground in this system that, again, as a child, I experienced one side of it, which was zoned neighborhood schools that I was assigned to. I didn't really have a choice of where I went. My parents didn't have the resources to send me elsewhere. And it was only at high school that I got the option to do something better. But I was one of a few, right? So it wasn't this universal thing. So that's what I wanted to understand in New Orleans. And the thing that I learned while teaching in New Orleans, again, being this sort of cog in the system, and you realize that really the whole thing was fundamentally broken. It was set up with the wrong incentives. It didn't work for students. It certainly didn't work for teachers. So Katrina hits about 3 weeks into school. The Saturday night before, we had a football jamboree.
Now, this would have been the start of your second year
That's right.
teaching.
That's right. So a football jamboree, and, like a lot of people in New Orleans, I mean, I'd gone to college there, so there had been storms that you see, and you kind of shrug your shoulders at, and you're like, all right, how many days are we going to be out? And so I remember coming home after the jamboree. I dropped off a couple of the students and whatnot, and I looked at the news and was like, this thing looks a little gnarly. Still didn't have a plan. Wake up Sunday morning and you see the interstates are already locked up, and that's when kind of the terror goes off. And of course, my cell phone's ringing. It's my parents calling, like, what are you doing? And And so I actually evacuated and took friends with me to Shreveport. So we left Sunday afternoon, took us probably 3 or 4 hours just to get to Baton Rouge. We dropped off actually a couple of people in Baton Rouge and went up to Shreveport. And when it hit, it was the same thing. A lot of us realized you sort of saw it go through, and it was hours later you start hearing that there's flooding happening, and that was unreal. A friend at the time that I had helped evacuate, her family was out of the country. We actually come back into the city the week after. They lived out in Metairie. And long story short, I actually left my car there and took their Suburban so we could fit more people. And so I don't know why I left my car there. But, I could see where water had come up to the doors. And we were hauling out, refrigerators. The place that I lived in, which was uptown, I couldn't get to for another couple of weeks. So I'd gone back to Baton Rouge at this point to be with other friends. Eventually, the realization sets in that we're not having school anymore. I mean, we're not having really anything in New Orleans for some time. And I was given two options. You can stay and teach and support students who had been evacuated in neighboring parishes, or you could move to Houston, where we also have a lot of students that have been displaced, families that are there. And since my place was okay, and I had some roommates, we said, you know what, I'm going to go back to New Orleans. So 3 weeks after the storm, I'm back in New Orleans, and I'm commuting every day to East St. John High School in Laplace. So it was, I was one of the few cars leaving the city at like 5:30 in the morning. It's still dark, and you could see the line of cars coming in to work on their houses during the day. Wow. And then at night, I'm one of the few going in as everybody else is going out. We would often have dinner, in Laplace or at the Outback on Veterans, because they had a one-size-fits-all kind of menu, and it's just the oddest time. Yeah. For me, it was probably around Thanksgiving when I got to finally go visit my old school. I knew the janitor. We had finally gotten in touch with each other. He lived around the corner, and so he helped me get into the school because I wanted to see and collect some things. And going in there was kind of the emotional release of...
Had the school been flooded?
Oh, yeah. And my classroom was on the first floor. So we it was, you could see the mold up on the walls. There were dead rats and other kind of, cats. I mean, there's just, everything was moldy and decaying. And in my room, I had, this American flag that I still have that's got mold, I had it in this thing, but you could see it covered. And it just, because I taught civics, and all this like emotion just came out of me of like how frustrated I'd been at the loss of like that experience, the loss of those students, because most didn't have cell phones at this time, right? We were still on those flip phones. And so I had no way of knowing where kids had gone or what they had done.
So how did that rest of that school year play out for you? I mean, you're teaching in St. John?
So I'm commuting every day, and literally they had these double wide trailers that FEMA had located there. When I first got there were no desks, no chairs, no books. It was just this kind of open trailer, and there were 60 kids on my roster, and every day it was a turnover, right? Because some families were using that as kind of a waypoint to, the next city where they could relocate. So it was just unpredictable, and I just kind of went back to the basics of like, look, this is both about kind of helping those students emotionally cope, but it's also like a lot of my students I experienced when I was back teaching in New Orleans. These sort of fundamental skill deficits, the inability to read, right, the inability to do sort of basic math. I wasn't going to be able to connect with them in learning kind of, about the American Revolution if they couldn't even read, it's a basic primary document. So we did a lot of work on phonics, on, reading comprehension, just to sort of build skills. And you just realize, again, the scale that I knew from other friends in New Orleans of how bad and how ill-prepared students were. I saw that now because all of a sudden my classroom was filled with kids from, Warren Easton or Kennedy and John Mack and, all of these schools kind of coming together and all totally unclear about their future. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the straw, right?
Yeah,
and at that point, not being, obviously, loved my experience, but my connection then was the frustration of the recovery in New Orleans, the frustration of what was before, and that's when I knew like I wanted to be part of fixing that. And so I got really involved in some of the Rebuilding New Orleans coalition. Scott Cowan, the Tulane president, led a kind of education group that was focused on how do we do this differently. Use the hurricane as an opportunity to build something better. And that became kind of the motivation for the next years of study when I went off to grad school and eventually come back to the city years later.
Now, grad school was where?
I went to Harvard.
Harvard. And so how did you do that?
Yeah, so
I'm still asking that question. Is it a scholarship situation?
It was, yeah. So I had the Edith Stokey Public Service Fellowship, and so this was the Kennedy School of Government. Again, now my mission is I want to understand how to remake policy and systems so they serve us better. And so my whole, commitment was I want to go study at the best place in America that has the people who have, led, government agencies at the highest level, who've been local mayors, et cetera. Learn from them so I can bring that back to Louisiana. And at this point, I'm a South Louisianan, right? I've already kind of decided my place is in South Louisiana, probably not North. Right. That'd be a whole nother episode of conversation.
So you had written off law school.
Yeah.
I read that you had maybe considered that and you're going down this public policy path.
Yeah, I was actually going to pursue a joint degree, and first semester I ended up at the Kennedy School. So the way it works is you would basically spend a year in one school, a year in the other, and your last 2 years you'd mix and match classes. And I decided after the first really semester that I didn't want to be a lawyer. Everything I wanted and what I wanted to do was really in public service, was in government, and kind of reforming that. And so I said, let's get out of here sooner.
So then you finish your degree there. That was 4 years?
That was 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
And then you went to work for the Department of Defense?
Yeah. So I was exposed to this opportunity called the White House Fellowship. And I learned about it probably towards the end of my first year at the Kennedy School. And, if the Kennedy School is sort of a master's program in government, this would be this, sort of PhD plus in government. And the idea started in the 60s under President Johnson. And the idea was to bring together every year 11 to 19 citizens who would be assigned to a cabinet secretary or a senior official in the White House. And you'd spend a year shadowing them, working on projects. And then as a class, you would come together to meet with all sorts of leaders, world leaders, the president, business leaders. And so, I put my name in the hat. I have no idea why or how. I just said, this is, again, what I want to study now is like, what is the practical levers, right, at this level? And if you can really sort of sit one-on-one with presidents and cabinet secretaries and ask them anything, what's that experience like? So I applied, you had regional interviews, then national kind of interviews, all these panelists with, Tom Brokaw was one of our panelists, and Wesley Clark, the former NATO, commander. I mean, you just sort of sit across from these people and you're a little bit starstruck and pinching yourselves. And then you meet these sort of fellow candidates who are some of the most accomplished people in the world, and you wonder, like, what doesn't belong here, But I just kept playing along, and
that is amazing.
It was an incredible experience.
So, what would you say was a takeaway from your time with Robert Gates at head of the Department of Defense?
Yeah, so I'm so glad, again, this is the influence of friends and mentors, because you have a selection week where you go and interview at all these agencies. So we've been accepted as White House Fellows. There were 14 of us in my class. And we're going to be the transition class. So we spend about half a year in the Bush administration, and then there was going to be an election. And turns out, it was the Obama administration.
Right.
I was really pushed by folks to take the Department of Defense slot. They thought, it's sort of way out of my comfort zone of my experiences, what I had known, and despite being a teacher in New Orleans. It was just going to be a very different world. And, Robert Gates, as just a public servant and leader who had the experience of running the CIA, running Texas A&M, now running the Department of Defense in the middle of 2 wars. There's a lot of lessons. I think at the core, the way he makes decisions is fundamentally the same way that you or I may make decisions. Right. And I think it was more of a reality check that these people are not any different than us. They're trying to surround themselves with other smart people, gather the right information. He listened way more than he talked. Always in meetings, he would sort of sit back, and then when he asked a question, it was always very pointed, very specific, and you knew he was wrestling to sort of get to the best kind of recommendation and outcome.
Right.
Principled guy, incredibly funny.
Really?
The best part is he would often take these evening cigar walks through a city where we were traveling internationally. And so after dinner, small group of kind of the traveling aides and some of the military assistants, and you just do these kind of walks, and he would tell stories, right? Because he had been in all these countries before, and it just humanized for me, again, this idea that we as leaders, there's a line of work you can go through to prepare yourself, and you should, but it's also, we're all the same. At the end of the day, we are people that have dreams and experiences that get us to a place, and if we're willing to contribute and put ourselves forward for these bigger ideals, then in those moments you have to use those skills of discernment, of asking questions, surrounding yourself with others that know much more about it, and then ultimately make a call or make a recommendation.
Yeah.
And he just did it with such class and conviction that it really inspired me on how I'd want to lead in the future.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you did that for a year, right? And then you come back to Louisiana?
That's right.
And where did you go there?
Yeah, so I met Paul Pasterek, who had been the former general counsel at NASA. He had been on our state board of education, and he and I had actually met right after Katrina during the sort of rebuilding New Orleans coalition and the education panel. So probably about 3 or 4 months before I knew the White House Fellowship would end, because the idea is really that this is a stopover. You're being prepared to go back to wherever you came from to make an impact, right? Carry it forward. So Paul was one of these folks I'd met and been really impressed with, and I knew he had become the state superintendent of education. And again, I'm thinking about, how and where can I now use these skills and experiences to make a change? And so I reached out to him. He happened to be in D.C. and our schedules aligned, and we just started talking about, how things were going in New Orleans, what his focus was on changing kind of the state. And Paul just blew me away as a leader of conviction. There's again, we can all quibble with certain skills and whatnot of leaders, but Paul knew every day who he was getting up fighting for. And it was kids like me growing up that didn't have those options and those chances. And this was a guy I said, you know what, I'll run through a wall for you. And I think, and if you know anything about Paul, he is he's a fiery guy. I thought I could help him complement kind of the fire and passion with some organizational management and some, strategy, and we, formed a really awesome team.
And how old were you at this time?
I'm probably 28 at this point.
28.
Yeah. So, I still think we can change the world.
So he offers you a job?
Yeah. And again, this is one of those, I feel like there's a lesson in here about kind of make up your own job. which I feel like I have done basically since being a teacher. Because when I taught, I wanted to combine it. I was also the basketball coach. I wanted to take on new responsibilities. When I went to, the Department of Defense, there really wasn't a job. It was sort of shadow your boss, but obviously I wanted to contribute. So I was finding projects I could work on. Here with Paul, it was, how do we design a role that allows me to kind of work across the agency and advance really specific projects. At the time, we were applying for this big federal grant called Race to the Top that was, trying to raise accountability in Louisiana, offer students more options, work on really troubled schools. And then the work in New Orleans specifically was, unprecedented, the sort of amount of money coming in both for physical rebuilding, but now this real transformation about how schools would be run. That was just cool stuff. And again, to have a leader who really gives you the freedom and kind of blesses you to go run and provides you cover. I mean, those are the kind of organizations that I was privileged to work in. And now when I lead, I like to lead the same way, which is you let smart people tackle big problems, help them clear obstacles. We butt heads a little bit of the time, but it makes our ideas even better.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Pivotal is pleased to sponsor the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Pivotal is a commercial building contractor that performs new building construction, building maintenance, tenant improvements, renovations, and additions. Pivotal has been in business for over 25 years. The Pivotal team is simply the best. They have an impeccable safety record, and they crush schedules. A focus on quality and professional communication is at the root of their success. Pivotal also performs programs for clients who build in multiple markets with current projects in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. If you are looking for the perfect addition to your project team, a contractor who can deliver the results you need to succeed, Pivotal is a one. When it's critical, call Pivotal. They can be found online at pivotalperforms.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm, offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. So you were with Pastrack for about a year?
I was with Paul for it was a couple of years, and then he resigned, and John White had been recruited here to be our superintendent of the Recovery School District.
I see.
And there was an interim period. I can't remember if it was sort of 6 or 12 months that I think Governor Jindal wanted John White to be our state superintendent. The state board was sort of waffling on that idea, and so they kind of set an interim in limbo. And so at that time, I again was very passionate about getting stuff done, and John was an incredible leader, and so I joined his team and became his deputy superintendent, and really had a focus on New Orleans and sort of the strategy there to kind of remake an entire sort of system of education. And that, even going back to my days with Gates, I mean, one of the things you kind of asked about what I'd learned, I mean, he would always share with me the sort of focus you've got to have when you're at really the top of one of these organizations. You can't control 95% of what goes on, especially in a $600 billion, 2 million person organization, including, civil servants and military folks. And, but what you can do is you can focus on a few key priorities and make sure they're executed well. So for Gates, it happened to be, lighter weight, but still mine-resistant vehicles that were in Afghanistan, because in Iraq, you're not traveling up the sides of mountains and, the trucks can flip over if they're too heavy. And so we had to adjust that, and he wanted a program that sped those resources to the battlefield. Similarly with Pasternak and then John White, is there was a very clear focus on New Orleans has to be a proof point. You can't let the Katrina experience and the billions of dollars and this chance to kind of start over go to waste.
Right.
Because, just God help us all, like if we were the leaders in place at that time and we didn't take kind of transformative action, because you don't get those chances, not that you wish for that, but you can't sort of just go back the same. That would have been a huge loss.
Right. So in 2012, you became the founder of the new schools for Baton Rouge.
That's right. So
how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of the BRAF story. I kept, so I was working in New Orleans, living in New Orleans. That's where we moved back. And I love the city. And
now, are you married at this point?
That's right. So we have one son, kind of measure new schools. And so he was just born around this time. And the whole idea of, New Orleans being this place that had this exceptional opportunity, I kept thinking about back home. And when I would talk to family members and friends back home, they would always, sort of say this line of like, well, I mean, New Orleans had the chance to wipe the slate clean.
Right.
It could get a fresh start. It has billions of dollars being poured into it. So it better get things right. It better be different. Right. And I just kept thinking that can't be the motivation for change in communities.
Right.
So I met John Davies and John Spain, and I didn't know really anything about BRAF, because most of the time I was working at the state, I was commuting back and forth every day. So, they talked about how they had been involved in very kind of episodic ways, micro ways of trying to change education outcomes in Baton Rouge. But they were kind of fed up with that. They wanted something bigger, right? They wanted to see transformational change. But they didn't know how. And they said, look, we're fully behind it. What does it look like? And John and I, started talking and thinking about it. And it was one of those moments that I was really ready to kind of do my own thing. And we came up with a plan and said, look, what if we try to replicate the lessons of New Orleans, obviously under different circumstances, in Baton Rouge? And we took a plan to the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. They said, look, we will help you raise the startup money. We'll incubate you. We'll help you find board members. Whatever you need, we will help you clear obstacles because we believe in this mission. And they did. I lived probably the first 6 months out of the BRAF offices. They were doing our accounting. They helped us start the nonprofit. They helped us raise early seed money. And just that ability of them, and this is where I start seeing the power of a community foundation and a aligned set of community actors that become laser focused on this vision, which we believed in giving every kid in the city access to a great school. And that would be the catalyst for changing our school system. So often we had done work in the classroom level, like when I was a teacher, Teach for America, or we try to throw out school boards and hire a new superintendent, which, seems to happen every couple of years.
Right.
And yet nothing changes, right? So what's the right scale we need to work on to create the sort of transformational change? And we believed, if you focused on schools as the unit of change, we had the right policy environment because of the work I had done with Paul, where we expanded not only clear accountability, letter grades in schools, but we expanded the ability of new schools like charter schools to be created. So these are nonprofit run schools that are publicly funded, publicly accountable. And so we had built this framework, and now we just needed an entity that could sort of help schools start and grow. And so we set this audacious goal. At first it was 12,000 students, then it became 30, that we wanted every kid in the city to go to an A or B school. And we were going to go out and find the best schools in America, invite them to Baton Rouge.
Like charter schools.
Exactly. We would help education entrepreneurs that had good track records grow their own school. So send them through kind of school incubators. So just like in the business startup world, this was now a way to do this specifically in this vein of education. And who would have thought, like in this public school sector, could you have sort of entrepreneurial energy growing and fostered? And we had to figure that out. So we did that over about 10 years. I started and led that organization.
And so you went out and you found the best charter schools.
Yeah.
Effectively, right?
That's right. And it's an ongoing process, right? I mean, recruiting a school, convincing them to scale their operations from one state to another, it takes a lot of work, a lot of problem solving, everything from, how do you align the curriculum to, do you have enough startup money? Because typically you want to hire leaders, a year out.
Right.
Where is the facility going to be? How do you find a facility that's not just, cheap and free and, maybe run down, but how do you build world-class facilities? I mean, all these things we had to sort of go through and solve with our partners. And that's the key is we didn't do it by ourselves. We had a lot of help, not just from BRAF, but other nonprofits, community leaders, that we were able to kind of align on a vision and a strategy, which was, we won't stop until every kid has access to an A or B school. And I don't care what they look like. Again, we're going to trust parents to choose the schools they want. But our job is to kind of prune schools that are not working. They should get out of the market fast. Schools that are working and have clear parent demand, we ought to scale even faster. And we attracted some of the best schools in the country that committed to coming here. They opened schools like Basis, schools like Great Hearts that's soon to open, Idea Public Schools, GEO, Next Generation High School, which has kids graduate not only with a high school degree, but an associate's degree. So they teach, their whole model is, let's have students enroll for their basic high school classes in community college classes, because they're virtually the same. They can do a crosswalk of kind of the core general community college requirements. Why not empower these students with more value? And that's the kind of innovation that, we have schools that are focused on students with autism. We have a school focused on health sciences that's growing from Kenner to Baton Rouge this summer. So that work, we ultimately went from, only wealthy and well-informed kids having access to a magnet or a private school, to today, you've got over 13,000 kids that have made a choice over the last 10 years to go to one of these charters. And I'll tell you, the results are performance across the board. All boats have risen. You have unprecedented choice. You have more middle and upper sort of, income families participating in public schools than ever before. So we're really, from a community standpoint, not just to say this selfishly, but I'm really proud that education, we seem to be on the right track of expanding opportunity and not having this kind of one-size-fits-all system.
So you had raised about $80 million in that process.
Yeah, most of it national. Really it was, now we probably, that raised $10 to $12 million locally. And it was that kind of investment and commitment, again, donors and philanthropists here that were so invested, that sort of showed national funders the deep commitment and belief in this strategy. And then we were able to team up with philanthropists like the Arnolds out of Houston, Michael Bloomberg's foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, the Dell Foundation. So we were able to then sort of, collate those resources and ultimately use them to start over 24 schools.
That is fantastic. So much more I'd like to talk to you about that. But that role there at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation through the new schools led to your current job. So tell us how that went down.
Yeah, I mean...
John Davies retired, and then they narrowed it down to like 6.
I didn't think he'd ever retire.
Yeah.
So... Again, you talk about people that invest in you and sort of, put a hand on your shoulder. John Davies and John Spain about, I guess this was in 2017 or 18. They looked at me and they said, look, we don't want to lose you in this community. We don't want to lose you at new schools. What is it that can keep you and your family happy? What do you need? And obviously I'm in a nonprofit and I'm not motivated by money per se, right? I'm going to be comfortable, and I've, it's funny. I mean, you go from, teaching and making $26,000 a year to, when I was in the White House Fellows Program, I made more money just as a GS-14 in federal government than my family had ever, made in a year, right? So money's not the issue. For me, though, it was this idea of like, how do I keep getting better? And so I said, look, I've actually been thinking about, because if I'd gone back and passed, I would have gotten a joint degree in public policy and business. I was thinking back to my economics days and the combination of building things, understanding programs, understanding sort of budgets, and how you can sort of, motivate and move those programs to do the thing you wanted to do. I felt like the experience I really needed was through business school. So they helped, the board at New Schools helped me go to business school. So I did a 2-year program at Wharton, the Wharton School, which is based in Philadelphia. Right. They had opened a campus in San Francisco. And so it's every other weekend, Friday, Saturday, all day classes. So I chose to go to San Francisco because I had a lot of East Coast experience and wanted to see a different part of the world. Right. So I went to that foreign country in California, and for 2 years, every Thursday night, I was on a plane out to San Francisco. And again, the point being that John and John were the ones that really encouraged both the board and said, we want to help you do this, and we'll invest in you as a leader in whatever you do in this community. And so that to me kept saying they believe in what I'm doing. Right. They're supportive of me building skills. And then that makes you obviously much more committed to the cause of this city. Right. And so shortly after that, I'd heard rumblings that John was thinking about leaving, and he said to me one day, if I ever do, you ought to think about this job. And again, you're like, whoa, you're an icon, this organization. I don't belong, right? Yeah. And no, he said, you should think about it. And COVID and everything else, and eventually he said, hey, I'm going to announce at our annual meeting that I'm retiring, and again, I hope you put your name in the hat. There was no hand on the scale with that, but I think of all the qualities, you would be a great fit, and you ought to try. And put my name in the hat, and off we went. And it was a lot of conversations, interviews, and ultimately got the call that they wanted me to take the job. And
that is fantastic.
Yeah. Again, just floored by the opportunity.
Yeah. So much to talk about, COVID as it related to New Schools and children, losing their ability to be educated.
Yeah.
And, how you address that and how you saw that firsthand. But that'll be for another day. But I did want to ask you, what are your goals as a leader of BRAF as you look out, 5 years down the road? What kind of things are you thinking about?
Yeah, so we've really centered our agenda on expanding opportunity in our community. And when I say that, there's really a lot of research that's happened, in fact, by folks that I studied under at Harvard, that, if you look at 1945, 90% of the kids born then ended up making more than their parents did. You fast forward to today, and it's basically a coin flip in this country. So this idea that the American dream and all the things we have built, the institutions, the community bedrocks to sort of foster the next group doing better than we did, it's not necessarily given that that's going to happen. We conduct an annual survey called City Stats. And so the survey was already out in the field when I'd arrived at BRAF. And so I get the results. And for the first time, a majority of parents and families in this community said they didn't want their kids to stay here as adults. Right. I mean, that's sort of the flashing red light sign of okay, we have got to turn something around. And so again, being the community foundation, your community foundation, what's our contribution in addressing that? And so we're getting very focused on what actually drives opportunity in our community. I know one big thing, and it's education. And so I've got a very clear view of what we have to continue to do in that space, particularly getting more kids ready for kindergarten, which would be a whole show. But we can do it because we've solved really big problems before. And you think about, violent crime. That's why we launched the Safe BR Coalition, which is really focused on not only putting more resources in the hands of law enforcement, but working on our criminal justice system and investing in youth to sort of help curtail the underlying causes. But we really have these kind of 6 pillars of the opportunity agenda that look at these things that we believe and data show from across the country that these are the needle moving issues. And if we in our community assess kind of the challenge in a data informed way and then come together with what kind of solutions do we need to bring to change that system, just like we did in K-12 schools here in Baton Rouge with our work to kind of introduce competition and choice and accountability. What do we need to do to make our neighborhoods safer? What do we need to do to improve our quality of life? Those are the kind of things we want to be focused on. So, I want BRAF to be a vehicle that anyone out there that feels like I want to be part of the solution, we give you on-ramps for how to do that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. Chris, it has been a pleasure to talk with you, and grateful that you are in the position that you're in. And I thank you for coming in.
No, thank you for having me. It's an awesome show, and look forward to many more discussions.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That was a great conversation with Chris. He is such a stand-up guy, and you can look at his career, and he has just done everything along the way to get where he is today. He will be a great leader for Baton Rouge and for BRAF, and will accomplish great things. So we appreciate Chris coming in. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.